Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Mustafa Abed. Dear friends, esteemed colleagues, welcome to the Alireza Ahmadian lectures in Iranian and Persianate studies. It is my pleasure to greet you all here today after a significant hiatus during the past year. As we come together in this shared virtual space, before anything, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which UBC Vancouver is located is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Today, we have the privilege of delving into a profound subject matter with a talk titled Lament of the Ages, Memory, Voice, and Experience with the Dotāris of Torbat-e Jām. We are honored to host our distinguished speaker, Dr. Marie Huber, and our esteemed discussant, Dr. Domenico Arturo Ingenito, whose insights promise to deepen our understanding of this rich topic. Before we proceed, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to our dedicated behind-the-scene team of Lisa, Winnie, and Tiffany. Their tireless efforts bring our series to life, and we owe the beauty of our visual engagements and the posters to Mr. Razman Boudarzi's wonderful design. As we continue to foster a vibrant academic community within our Iranian and Persianate studies program, it is my distinct pleasure also today to welcome a new colleague, Dr. Alexandra Hoffman, Assistant Professor of Classical Persian Literature and Culture. Dr. Hoffman brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to our program, and we are eagerly anticipating her contributions. I'm thrilled to announce that Dr. Hoffman will be presenting her own lecture in this series next week, an event not to be missed for those who share a passion for Persian literature and culture. Today, we have the honor of Dr. Hoffman joining us to introduce our esteemed presenter and discussant. Before just passing it on to Dr. Hoffman, I would like to mention that due to prior commitments, I will unfortunately have to depart from our session a bit earlier today. However, again, as mentioned, you will be in excellent hands as Dr. Hoffman will graciously continue to moderate the discussion in my place instead of me. And I'm confident that the dialogue will be both engaging and insightful under her guidance. Thank you very much for joining us. And I look forward to the thought-provoking conversation that lies ahead. Dr. Hoffman, please, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abed for your very kind words and for my introduction. I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker, Marie Huber, who is an assistant professor of Persian and comparative literature at Stanford University. Her research focuses on Persian poetry and poetic performance, as well as the marginal modernity of Iranian new wave filmmakers, such as Feridun Rahnama, Parviz Kimiavi, and Nasser Taqvai. She has recently published an article on Kimiavi titled The Stone Garden, Meditations on History, Experience, and the Nature of the Mystical. And she is the author of Memories of an Impossible Future, Mehdi Ahavansaleh and the Poetics of Time, published by Brill in 2016. She is currently developing a diachronic analysis of performativity in Persian poetry, along with a new book provisionally titled Infinite Events, Poetry, Music, and Spiritual Practice in the Shadow of Sheikh Ahmadian Jām. We are also very happy and honored to have our discussant here today, who is Domenico Ingenito, Associate Professor of Iranian Studies and Premodern Persian Literature at the University of California, Los Angeles, Bahari Fellow in the Persian Arts of the Book, core faculty member of the Pur Dawood Center of the Study of the Iranian World, and former director of the UCLA program on Central Asia. His research interests center on ancient and medieval Iran, Persian poetry, visual culture of Iran and Central Asia, gender and translation studies, and pre-modern manuscript culture. We are so excited to welcome both Dr. Huber and Dr. Ingenito today. Thank you both for being here. And with that, I open the floor to Dr. Huber and her lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hoffman, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, both of you, Dr. Hoffman and Dr. Abedi-Nifar, for the gracious invitation. It is a great pleasure and honor to be part of the Alireza Ahmadian lectures, and it is wonderful to be here today. Thank you, Domenico. I look very much forward to your questions and to kicking off the discussion part. I have to admit I'm a little bit nervous, so I'm not going to say a lot right now and dive straight into the lecture, into my talk itself. Let me just do the screen share, and I hope it will all go well. 1 second, please, as I try and sort out the technical issues now.
Wonderful, Dr. Huber. Yeah, we can see the.
You can see that? Okay, wonderful. So thank you. So my talk is already has been mentioned, Lament of the Ages, Memory, Voice and Experience with the Dotāris of Torbat-e Jām. سرهدی عجیب تو فریاد قرن هاست در آن دوتار گشته نهان گرم های او. A strange Sarhadi is the lament of the ages. The voiced breath has concealed itself in that dotar. Reads a line in the poem Dotāri Samandari's Dotar by Mehdi Akhavanistoghi, the eminent Iranian poet who died in 1990. Most of the famous Dotāris were still alive when the poem was written. Not only Hossein Samandari, but also Nazar Muhammad Suleimani, Nur Muhammad Dorpur, Murad Ali Salar Ahmadi, Ghulam Ali Pur Atai, Abdullah Sarwar Ahmadi, or Osman Muhammad Parast. I mention these masters in part as a token against oblivion, as if pronouncing their names could bring something back of their art, a voice that lives and dies with the now of performance. Much has changed since the last century. The watershed of the Islamic Revolution of 1979, the precarious position of the Sufi orders, the rise of a new kind of Shiite religious nationalism, the increased spread of mass media and the erosion of the social fabric, the community in which the Dotāris of Torbat-e Jām could uphold their circles of divine recollection, or zikr, have all been weakening the foundations of Dotāri practice and made it increasingly impertinent to our age. In Akhavan's poem, the memory, or residue, as Torbat-e Jām would say, of an effect is invoked, belatedly in poetic speech. It is the almost corporeal shrine to an experience that has been lost into song. Akhavan's words kindled a desire for something I'd never known or heard. In 2013, many years after first reading the poem, the chance arose for me to visit Torbat-e Jām, one of the regional capitals of what is now called Khorasan-e province, close to the border with modern-day Afghanistan. There's a particular sense of space in these liminal lands that once formed the heart of Greater Khorasan, but are now relegated to the pastoral edges of modern Iran. Like the spaces they inhabit, the Dotāris too belong to the margins. Irene Markov has shown that traditional folk music was harnessed for the creation of a national Turkish music. However, the regional traditions of Iran were never part of the Pahlavi nation-building enterprise. Except for a brief interlude of ethnographic interest in the 1970s, Iran's diverse non-classical music traditions have remained indissociable from the peripheral status of various ethno-religious identities. The internal other that Kurds, Turkmen, Azeris, Baloch, Sunnis or Arabs are to this day. On the slide here you see two images. The picture on the right is a still from Farshad Jan's 2007 documentary on Ustad Dorput, titled Zakir. The film is remarkable in that it opens up a space for the master to speak and play the dotar, without the filmmaker ever intruding. The photo on the left was taken on the day of my visit, or pilgrimage, ziyarat, as one would say in Persian, differentially, to Bokhars on the 17th of October 2013. A string of serendipities had led to encounters that would make my trip possible. All throughout, there was a sense of being witness to something extraordinary and unique, something that Akhavan's words capture so much more powerfully than I could ever do. The blurry photograph on the side was taken with a battered old mobile phone, in haste, and without the time to adjust any focus. What you see is a figure, a certain non-urban space, not unlike the village spaces in Iranian New Wave cinema, and the horizon. I had been told only moments before that the border to Afghanistan was over there. Indeed, the other side seemed almost reachable. In 2013, the quickest way to head out was still by taking the plane to Mashhad and then catching the overland bus. Afghanistan continues to be a foreign, inferior other to city dwellers across Iran, and the scars of discrimination are still very much felt. In the villages around Torbat, however, the space beyond the border, along with those who have crossed it, figures as a place of origin rather than the byword of an otherness neglected by history. Poetic genealogies are forged and stories abound of dotāri masters from Afghanistan come to settle in Bokhars, Khaf, or Torbat. The eminent music scholar and composer Fawzi Ahmad, who in the years leading up to the Islamic Revolution traveled across Iran to record regional music traditions for national Iranian radio and television, mentions an old man from Marv who had left his home for Iran. His manner of singing was different. It was ancient and real, which is why it had another kind of impact. شیوه خواندنش متفاوت بود، کهن بود و واقعی، بنابراین تاثیر دیگری داشت. All of the old dotāri masters recount having learned some maqams in their repertoire from various figures, clerics, Sufis, or itinerant musicians that hailed from the other side of the border. By way of a brief explanation, let me mention that maqam in Torbat-e Jām has a number of meanings that do not necessarily align with more standard definitions of the term. In the case of Navā'i, maqam refers to piece and a style of performance that can be traced back to a particular master. I looked hard for a map to show you today. Historical maps are difficult to come by, while modern maps tend to ensconce anachronistic geographies. This particular map is taken from Shivan Mahendra Raja's thorough and informative monograph on Ahmadian Jām. It shows a space without borders that captures not only a moment in history, but also the memory of a cultural ecumeny that lives on in the villages around Torbat-e Jām. Before we proceed any further, I would like to share with you one of the recordings I made on that 17th of October 2013. It is a performance of what may well be the most iconic piece of dotāri repertoire, Navā'i. I intentionally do not use the terms poem or song at this moment for reasons that will, I hope, become clearer over the course of this talk. I would also like to point out that numerous and more professional recordings exist of Navā'i. The first one, supervised by Fawzi Ahmad in the 1970s, captures Murad Ali, Salar Ahmadi's voice, and Nazar Muhammad Soleimani's dotar. However, recordings tend to abstract the artifact, the song poem, from what I would like to call the performative matrix, the time and place of a voice, extending out to and being received by a participating audience. They also cut out the white noise of the background sounds and the comments unfolding around the performance, along with the performance instructions on how to understand the poem. A sonic gloss that resembles the notes on the manuscript's margins. Finally, they homogenize, as it were, language itself. What you will hear in the next 8 minutes is a polyphonic structure of different accents and linguistic registers existing in parallel. The standard, educated urban Persian of the main interlocutor, the local rural inflection of Ustad Torbat, answering and explaining in Torbat-e dialect. Most conspicuous and shared with Daddy of Afghanistan is the pronunciation of here for the first person singular instead of the standard Persian am. So it would be in Torbat-e, it would be guftom instead of guftam. And finally, the more or less standard Persian with which the poem itself is pronounced. This is not the place to elaborate on the significance of these registers as markers of class education and ultimately history. Because of its ephemeral nature, the significance of sound has often been overlooked, and scholars of Persian literature have only recently begun to validate sound as an object of study. Here, I would like to mention above all Alexander Jabari's article, The Sounds of Persian Modernity, which offers a highly perceptive analysis of how nationalism and modernity affected the Iranian soundscape. Significantly for the present discussion, it was the radio with its radical separation of voice from its point of origin, quote by Christine Eric, which, from the inception of broadcasting in 1939, helped to install the Tehrani dialect of a patchwork of local idioms. However, my aim here is not to chart the mechanism of modernization, but to trace a voice back to the locus or moment from which it emerges. In the process, I hope to shed light on a tradition that continues to exist as if in defiance of the standardization and nationalization efforts that radically changed both poetic practice and language itself in the modern era. Now, let us read the poem together and then listen to Ustad Torbat. Navā'i. غمش در نهان خانه دل نشیند، به نازی که لیلی به محمل نشیند. به دنبال محمل چنان زار گریم که از گریم ناقه در گل نشیند. نوایی 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 نوایی، الهی ورفت در نشان جدایی. به دنبال محمل سبکتر قدم زن، مبادا غباری به محمل نشیند. هر آن کاروانی که شب راه طی کرد، دم صبح اول به منزل نشیند. نوایی 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 نوایی، چه بودی نبودی نشان جدایی. به اعزاز و اکرام و الطاف شاهی، گدایی به شاهی مقابل نشیند. امیدوار جامی به فردای محشر، به زیر لوای مزمل نشیند.
ذوالفقار خیلی کنید خدا بیامرزه و قربان رد رو آقای ذوالفقاری شما باید پیش دکتر شاگردی کنید که بده آن اساسا بون بودی داری نیم بله که شما سخن ما برید توی خیابان بندازید دکتر به دهن خواننده هم میدن فردا بیتاری کندن این اشتنی پرده کردن بله کوگردری سر اولاخ مخانه میاین یک بار به هم مپردن جنگ خروس این میگن کوگردری همین نوایی اول هم که گذری بود این که ما بساب ما خوندم وقتی که ما بردن مسعود معزین خدمه بود اونجا کم و بجای کارای چیز میکردن مرد انداختن هم دایر این نوایی دادم به من مرادی اگر نه نوایی اول همین نوایی که گذری بود که از افغانستان حبیب الله اغول بود می آمد بزد اینجا از احبال ها بود نوری که لیلا قامش در نهان خانه دل نشیند قامش در نهان خانه دل نشیند به نازه که لیلا به محمل نشیند به نازه که لیلا به محمل نشیند دنبال معمل چنان زار و گریم به دنبال معمل چنان زار و گریم که از گریم ناقدر گل نشیند نوایی 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 الهی برفتن نشانی جدایی دنبال معمل سبکتر قدم زن به دنبال معمل سبکتر قدم زن مبادا غباره به معمل نشیند مبادا غباره به معمل نشیند نوایی میراجنامه وقتی که خرقی رسول الله برکت دادن به امام رضا داد به ابو سعید ابوالخیر ابو سعید ابوالخیر داد به احمد جام احمد جام بود بده به شاه الله به خوج عبدالله انصار این باری شطور که کردن عبدالرحمن جامی محمدی مشرف شد فناف الله داریم فناف رسول داریم فناف شیخ فناف رسول شد به این معلوم به این نظری آمد که رسول الله ما میراج گفت تا این شد که به اعزاز و اکرام و الطاف شاهی گدای و شاه مقابل نشیند هر آن کاروانی که شب را طی کرد هر آن کاروانی که شب را طی کرد دم صبح اول به منزل نشیند نوایی 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 چه بودی نبودی نشان جدایی به اعزاز و اکرام و الطاف شاهی به اعزاز و اکرام و الطاف شاهی گدای و شاهی مقابل نشیند گدای و شاهی مقابل نشیند امیدوار جامی به فردای محشر امیدوار جامی به فردای محشر به زیر لوای مزمل نشیند نوایی 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 چه بودی نبودی نشان جدایی
If you were able to tune into the Khorasani idiom, you might have caught a small detail of a migrant origin and a porous border in Ustad Dorpur's account. Someone by the name of Habibullah used to come from Afghanistan and play this very Navā'i. از افغانستان یکی به اسم حبیبالله می اومد، همین نوایی را می زد. Several poems in the repertoire of the Dotāris of Torbat-e Jām are attributed to two intellectual greats of Herat. Abdullah Ansari, theologian and author of the Book of Prayers, Mojaddedi Naqshbandi, and Abdurrahman Jami, the poet-scholar whose work came to be read and received in the remotest corners of the Persianate world. However, the takhallus, or sonic signature, at the end of our poem is deceptive. Jami, full of hope for tomorrow's last judgment, امیدوار جامی به فردای محشر. Navā'i does not appear in Jami's Divan or another known pedigreed manuscript. Rather, in the case of Navā'i, as with other Dotāri poems, we encounter the absence of a stable name and a clear point of emergence, whether musical or poetic. The description of authorship here resembles the invocation of fictional histories and creates genealogies that connect both singer and audience to a point in time and space that is imagined to be real. Paradoxically, the practice of the Dotāris appears and professes to carry on a tradition that hails back to pre-modern times and to a geocultural space that was held together by a shared cultural vocabulary. However, the undocumented, ambiguous origin of poems and music alike fails to square with modernity's quest for pure sources. Ultimately, we're left with nothing but the accounts of the Dotāris themselves. It is this depth of time and the thought of a voice, a human breath, living on beyond the intellectual, geopolitical, and social divisions brought on by the 20th century that continue to haunt and intrigue. How to read time in the absence of a manuscript tradition? How can we understand origins and evolutions? That is, the continuum of changes a text undergoes as it travels from past to present. On the slide, you see photos of notebooks, in Persian, bayaz, from the collection of Ustad Dorpur, courtesy of his son, Ustad Farooq Dorpur. By their very nature, notebooks are both humble and ephemeral, and therefore tend not to be preserved in libraries or archives. Note the detail from the famous Divan of Hafiz. The poet here, lodged in an alcove, holds a copy of what is, we imagine, a collection of his own poems, written in the oblong format of notebooks. Had Sultan Muhammad the painter not captured this fictional moment, no trace of the notebook would have come down to us. Rather than standing alone as authoritative versions of an autonomous text, notebooks serve as aide-mémoire for the vast repertoire of poems sung by the Dotāris, more than 3,000 in the case of Ustad Dorpur. Part of a semi-oral tradition, they resemble the nuskhe, of performers in mourning plays, ta'ziye, or the scrolls, tumar, of the storytellers, naqal. In all these cases, the texts interact in complex ways with the spoken performance. They are not absolute, but instead depend on, to quote Jeffrey Squires, the drama of their presentation, the voice, the audience, the occasion. For the remainder of this talk, I would like to focus on Navā'i and the 5 principles that, I argue, animate the musical and poetic practice of the dotāris. By reading Navā'i as a poem in space and time, sung to and received by an audience, I also hope to elucidate aspects of the performative nature of Persian poetry itself before the advent of modernity. Sorry, my slides are a bit messed up. So the first point is the self-referentiality and semantic emptiness of the poem. Domenico Ingenito has worked and talked about this. Unlike narrative prose, poems do not construct their own coherent fictional worlds, but are plotless constellations until enacted in a performance that anchors them in our presence. Sorry, oh no, sorry, I got my slide, my papers mixed up. Okay, for the remainder of this talk, no, sorry, it was fine anyway. Give me just 1 second. My papers are all slightly not numbered, which is a bit of an issue. Anyway, 1 second, please. Okay. Now, number 2 is the empty space at the center of the poem. In the moment of performance, the lyric I becomes embodied by that of the performer, reciter, singer, or storyteller, and inhabited by the listener through a mechanism of triangulation. Number 3, time and experience of time in performance. Ethnomusicologist, regular Burkhard Qureshi, writes that with relation to time, the assumption is that a musical work embodies cognitive time notions or concepts, but that its performance generates a time experience through sound perception which transcends, yet incorporates cognition by creating an existential reality of a continuous present. Number 4, the modality of memory that underlies both the poem itself and the spiritual practice that is centered on it. The poem is the moment between an experience that has been, the mystic vision, and a future that is promised, messianic horizon. Number 5, the community in which all performance is necessarily embedded. The expression Alireza, closing or tying the circle of remembrance, describes the ritual of the Sufis as the coming into being of a transient community rooted in speech or voice breath. Hoi, hu, or hey, as you heard at the end of Ustad Dordapour's performance, the cri du cœur that pierced the songs of the dotāris, without ontological separation between performer and audience. The Persianate tradition abounds in performative genres, ta'ziye, mourning play, padkhani, the illustrated narration of Shiite martyrdom legends, and naqali, the dramatic telling of epics, have all been studied and documented. The excellent work of Babak Rahimi and Kumiko Yamamoto bears mentioning here. Besides the performance and performativity of classical Persian poetry, has received a great deal of scholarly attention over the past couple of years, above all in Dominic Brookshaw and Domenico Ingenito. Rooted in acts of speech that are bound by setting and audience, the practice of the dotāris, I would like to argue, belongs to the same matrix of performative genres. Performances are never isolated context-free events, but happen within a specific historical, social, and spatial framework that determines the meaning. Thus, for example, the non-cosmopolitan spaces and audiences of ta'ziye or padkhani are distinct from the urban coffee house setting of Navā'i. There, as in all performances, mutatis mutandis, the audience enters into time-bound covenant with the performer. For the duration of the performance, fiction and reality become overlaid, as the listeners at the retelling of Ferdowsi's Book of Kings keep bribing the Navā'i, evening after evening, in the hope of averting the inescapable fate of Rostam killing Sohrab. Time follows the time of memory, where the story is ending, always already waits to be told. The audience, we, know the poem by heart, yet the ineluctable end appears contingent, as merely one possibility among many up the sleeves of the master storyteller. Storyteller and audience are connected through the experience of an existential reality of a continuous present, to quote regular Qureshi, created by the performance. In Khani Hashtum by Adamak, the Eighth Trial and the Stickman, a contemporary reworking of a Naqshbandi performance by Mehdi Akhavan Sales, the same poet who invoked Hossein Samandari's Dotāri in our epigraph. The borders between the story and what lies outside are shaken, as the covenant between performer and audience no longer holds. The rift is that of modernity, prying the listeners away from the old storyteller. Television has replaced the two-way bond of the traditional setting through which poet, performer, and audience were once connected. Alireza Kimyavi's 1973 film The Mongols offers a scathing critique of the impact of new media on village audiences and communities in Iran after national Iranian radio and television began regular programming in 1967. Until then, to paraphrase Christine Eric, only the voice had been radically separated from its origin to become the disembodied carrier of news, poems, and stories alike. In the 1970s, the storyteller too was made redundant as the origin of all narration. In Kimyavi's film, what remains is nothing but noise and empty laughter. It is the existential connection between performer and audience in which the practice of the dotāris around Torbat-e Jām is rooted, as a covenant between each individual singer and listener in the moment of sacred audition or sama. Text, music, and spiritual practice emerge from the same matrix. Michel de Certeau in the Mystic Fables speaks of the volo, I am willing, that lies at the origin of the mystic's utterance. The affirmation of a will to enter into relation, into a covenant with the divine. A similar volo, I would like to argue, is the foundation of dotāri performance. There, the significance of the poem is determined by the setting in which it is sung and received. Love and desire are the existential stakes at the heart of all poetic speech, while the lines between erotic and mystical love cannot always be drawn. In Navā'i, as in countless other dotāri poems, lady and god are an indivisible whole, resembling two faces of the same coin. It is the circumstances of the performance and, as the dotār masters themselves would affirm, the silent intention of the performance that guide our understanding in one way or the other. Meaning, rather than fixed within the text itself, is contingent on a particular constellation of participants. Each performance is understood as the votive offering of a community, an act of speech that gives rise to transient reality. The practice of the dotāris as the union between music, text, and performance is threatened, if not on the verge of extinction. As Amina Yousefzadeh describes in her book, Le Bakhsh du Khorasan Iranien, festivals of so-called regional Navā'i music across Iran have been offering an artistic platform and a source of additional income. Since the Dotāris of Torbat-e Jām are for the most part farmers, their livelihood is vulnerable to the impact of climate and weather events, and the uncertain economic conditions offer no encouragement to the young. Thus, asked why he disappeared from public view after the Islamic Revolution, Murad Ali Salah Ahmadi stated the need to farm his land to secure living. As we speak today, the old masters have passed away and only a few of their descendants are keeping the practice alive. Most importantly, however, the community itself, the circle of Sufis, engaged in remembrance, in Persian, the halqa zikr, is no longer an unshakable bedrock for the practice it used to hold up. Economic hardship, rural exodus, the precarious status of Sufi orders, along with the marginal position of Sunnis in Iran, are factors eroding the traditional performance settings. The Dotāris belong to a vanishing life world, and, to paraphrase Jean-Luc Nancy, a community that may soon be inoperative. In their practice, a transient bond still comes into being, rooted in speech or voice breath, with each circle formed. Domenico Ingenito, in his magisterial study of Saadi Shiraz, speaks of the body of the subject as the almost that separates the visible from the invisible. This almost is, I believe, the condition of possibility for the experience of desire itself. It is the promise of something that can only ever be moved towards, but never reached. With each new poetic performance, the bridge of desire between the visible and the invisible worlds is extended anew. But how can definitions of body and desire deepen our understanding of dotāri practice? Francesco Giusti, in his discussion of Dante's famous sonnet, Tanto gentile, tanto onesta pare, writes that a poem is conceived as a verbal substitute for Beatrice that, when recited, aims to induce the same actual effects in its readers that the actual woman induces in her beholders. Further down, Giusti continues, the crystallized moment, which encapsulates iteration, moves towards the final side that is the threshold to the fullness of experience, and from where the poem can begin again. The poem happens after its end and before its beginning. In other words, Dante's text, the poetic artefact, serves as a placeholder for the beloved, while the experience invoked in and by the poem is iterable, enacted again from the beginning with each new recitation. Dotāri practice, I would like to argue, shares the same philosophical tenets that underlie all pre-modern lyric across a vast intellectual space, from the Mediterranean to the Deccan, an intellectual matrix of Neoplatonic, and to a lesser degree, Aristotelian thought lies at the origin of both the Christian and the Islamic Middle Ages. It is this matrix that allows us to see and avow certain correspondences between Dante and the often anonymous, non-canonical, or folk poets of Torbat-e Jām. For both, the poem is firstly a movement of infinite approximation, to quote Friedrich Hölderlin, animated by desire and longing for the other, be that Beatrice or in Navā'i, Lady God. Secondly, an almost physical token, a voiced song, in Persian, Navā', for the absent, no longer reachable beloved. And thirdly, the memory capsule of a fictional or fictionalized experience to be unfolded in time, iterated with each new performance. After all that has been said over the past 30 minutes or so, let us take another look at the poem with which we started out on our journey. At the heart of the poem is a song aside, semantically empty, untranslatable, and reaching out towards a you without stable referent, repeated as a refrain, or, to use a liturgical term, antiphon, that suggests both rhythmic circularity and the presence of a community. Navā'i, 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 Navā'i. Now I need to find my last slide. Who is speaking and addressing a you? Does Navā'i, repeated 4 times, mean you are the voice breath of song? Is Navā'i a circular gesture of self-referentiality of the poem addressing itself? Or finally, is it an invocation, unlikely, but still, of Mir Alishir Navā'i, the 3rd grade of Herat? Perhaps we're supposed to keep wondering in a state of abeyance, just like the you of the address is uncertain, so the beloved too is absent. Unlike Beatrice, Lady God never reveals herself. She is fundamentally, existentially, as it were, veiled. Her grace is but the memory trace of a vision that may never have been, yet that nonetheless has a profound and almost corporeal reality in the poet's mind. A place is an empty cipher, the unattainable space inside the howdah. Ustad Dorpur makes it clear how to read the poem when he tells his audience that this Navā'i is a tale of ascension. In Navā'i Miraj Namas. The ascension into the highest presence, the Godhead, is also ours. The foundation for the lyric eye becoming embodied in the listener lies here. In the invitation to inhabit a speech situation, to quote Ahmad Surban. It is also the ground on which Sama can be understood as a spiritual practice. In the moment of embodiment, we too ascend into the presence of the beloved, before once more falling back into time-bound space, in an event that is iterated with each recitation. The time of the poem is the iterable now of messianic time, the voice sigh, Navā, and the hope of redemption are at once the poet's, ours, and that of the singer in the moment of song. Does Navā'i too come to happen after its end and before its beginning? Who are we? What is our time? Is the poet's tomorrow ours as well? For the infinite moment of the song, it is. Now, here's just a very brief bibliography of some of the literature and research that has gone into this talk. If you want to contact me later, and I'm happy to share any of these works. At the end, I would like to thank my audience today, of course, but above all, I would like to thank Ustad Mojaddedi Dorpur, the son of Ustad Dorpur, Dr. Safi Khutami Fahadan, Dr. Alireza who took me to Balkhars on that 17th of October, and Dr. Masood Jafari Ajazi. I would also like to just briefly thank Dr. Vincent Barlett and Dr. Nasrin Rahimir for the mentorship and boundless human generosity. And that is the end of my talk now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hoover, for this really fascinating talk. We really appreciate you giving us a window into the music of Dotāris. I would like now to invite Dr. Ingenito to share his thoughts and comments. And if you would like Dr. Hoover to respond to him directly, you're very welcome to. We have about 10-15 minutes for this part, and afterwards we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you so much, Professor Hoover, dear Marie. I'm very glad that we keep talking about things that we started discussing some time ago, years ago actually at this point, and I'm very glad that you're developing your own approach to this fascinating topic from so many different angles, and you're bringing together different perspectives and generously also relying on scholarship of colleagues of different generations and creating a new space for all of us to come together and discuss the importance of performance and performativity in the context of Persian lyric and beyond. It's not just about Persian lyric, right? As you show very well in your presentation. So thank you for creating this opportunity for all of us. And I'll be very brief. I'm really excited about the way you are digging through different materials and creating this form of communication that overcomes spatial and temporal distance, and you rely on your own experience. So you're in the quest for the bodies of the ancient, the voices of the contemporary or the quasi-contemporary. So you show a very complex timeline that intersects also with your own experience, with your own body, the way that your own body has been exposed to knowledge and to aesthetic opportunities. So you really offer this provocative way of relying on one's own aesthetic experience in a very specific geographical space from within, and also once you're extract yourself from it, in a fashion that is very productive, that it does produce a discourse that is very powerful and is very generous. It's very generous because it doesn't really provide final answers, but it opens a whole new horizon of different questions, and everyone is welcome in a way. If I understand correctly your operation, everyone is welcome to chime in and participate in this conversation, like different instruments that are trying to tune each other right along from different angles and different critical perspectives. I would like to bring everything a bit back to strong theoretical questions that are very important for all of us to rediscuss periodically. The first question relates to the difference between performance and performativity. I try to look at performance as in Persian ejra, so performing a text, performing a musical tune, and it's the part in which there is an actual performance of, it can be with music, can be with voice and recitation. Performativity, I read performativity as the performance that happens with the text, that is embedded within the text already, right? So we have this too, and it's interesting to see how in different, if we look at these two basic categories, so the performance and performativity, performance studies and performativity studies, we can see how texts can do things even when they're not performed. And I think that you go there in a very interesting way, but I was wondering whether you've been thinking about this difference, how you look at texts from the perspective of their own performativity occasions rather than performative occasions, and how you look at them from their performance possibilities across history, right? So when texts can be performed, and then texts that are not performed still retain echoes of initial potential performances, or offer themselves to the space of reception, calling for performance. So this is their performativity. So they do things that they call also audiences across time, regardless of the initial intentions of authors. They call for a space of performance through their own internal linguistic and rhetorical structure. So I was wondering whether, how, if you could share
Domenico,
more.
I'm really sorry, my daughter just interrupted,
No worries.
and she's very bold. So part of what you just said, I'm really, really sorry. I did not understand.
No worries. No, it's
So
just about difference. Sorry, but only about difference between performance and performativity, and how some of the texts you're working on are already containing a potential for performance. They're already asking to be performed. And how do we cope with this? And this is something you're already doing, I think. But I was wondering whether what your plan is, whether you're looking at other texts, whether you're thinking theoretically about this problem. This is one question. The other question is the connection between philology and performance studies. And you go there too in different ways, I think, your talk. I was wondering whether you've been thinking about this more. If we think of philology as the reconstruction of the possibilities of meaning that are embodied in material transmission of texts, right? So we look for texts, we try to reconstruct their meaning in their own context, in their historical context, in relation with one another. So this is what philology tries to do in a way, historicizing the text as well, right? So looking at them and sort of taking out the dust of time and trying to clarify how they work in their own context, grammatically, syntactically, intertextually, actually with non-literary texts, with historiography, and of course, you work with different kinds of sources. It's already there. How this philological quest connects with performance studies, seeing performance as a space of research that focuses on bodies and the connection between bodies and texts. We can, you do work with bodies as well. You seek the presence, the physical presence of performance. How do we put these two realms together, the philological and the formal studies aspects of this. So this is the, these are the general ideas that, your talk, I think your research is triggering in my way, the way that I read it. And it's very generative and very generous. And feel free to, share your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Domenico. First of all, I'm just profoundly grateful that you can be here today. It is wonderful for me. It is a great honor and a great pleasure. And yes, we've been having conversations about this topic for a while, and I've always been very profoundly inspired by your work, which I think, of course, has fed into what I'm trying to do or what I'm trying to understand. So as a scholar and as a human being, I'm very much indebted to you, and I'm grateful that you can be here. Your two questions, they're very, very profound and very broad. So these will be areas that I will, of course, be looking at. Regarding performance and performativity, the performativity of text in this particular case of the Dotāris, one thing that I will need to do, because it has not really been done, is to really collect the text and to archive the texts that are sung by the Dotāris. That will be a first step towards understanding the performativity of these texts. Now, Ustad Torbat has this collection, or his son still has this archive of the bayars that I would really like to look at each single poem, because many of these poems just do not exist as recordings. So they're written down in these little notebooks, but we do not have the music that goes with the poems. Much of the time we do not have any recordings, but all of these texts were selected on the basis that they are inherently suited for the musical performance. So there's something about these texts that ties them together, that makes all of these texts in these 3,000 poems inherently performative. But what is that particular thing? What is it? What is the kind of common denominator, the tenor that connects these texts? That is something that I will need to understand. And right now, I do not really have the answer. This is something that I will need to look at. So I'm interested, of course, I will be interested in the project that is hopefully going to grow into a book. In both of these aspects, that yes, the performance and the performativity, I'm trying to bring both of them together, because performance is fundamentally done by body. So I'm trying to bring in the performance of the body in space, in music, and of course as the body of resonance, as the dotar that Ahmadian puts in the poem, the Dotāri of Jām, and that of course the dotar is the body as well. So how does the body resonate with the poems, and how do the poems resonate with the body? So this is something I will need to work on, and this will require, again, sifting through these poems and analyzing a huge body of poems that we have. So that is something that needs to be done in the future. But there's a very clear position when you ask the Dotāris about why they sing particular poems. So there's a spiritual answer, of course, the kind of content, so they're suited. But some of the time the spiritual answer does not really seem to be an answer. So there's something more about the text that makes the text itself suited to performance. I don't know if that answers your question.
Of course, yeah. And this also connects also with the philological part of it, right? And you classifying the text, looking for clues and putting them together, creating narratives also, right? Within these lyric moments that are empty bodies of language waiting for, being inhabited, embodied, and performed, right? They reacquire their own possibilities of meaning through this moment of performance. Absolutely. Thank you.
But all of these empty bodies of language are accented in strange ways. So in many of the poems, you can almost detect the place of emergence when you look philologically, when you look at the language itself. So you can even tell the differences between the various villages. So there's certain, Ustad Torbat, he uses certain words like loch, that are specific to one particular regions. And so you can sort of trace these words, and it's going to, of course, that requires some detective work, but you can trace the accents that tie each poem, each poetic speech act, each word in a poem to one particular place. Now, the historicizing is something that is more difficult. So it is possible, I think, to a certain extent, to anchor poems or anchor the works that are being sung in a place. But anchoring them in a particular time is going to be more difficult because, again, because of the absence of manuscripts. So much of this is transmitted orally, semi-orally, really, in these notebooks that are circulated among this particular group, but not circulated outside. So it is really a more or less close community that you're relying on, and this particular close community, of course, constructs its own genealogies, its own histories, its own legends. So time is very hard to pin down. Place is easier to pin down philologically. It's much less problematic. The time is the thing I'm going to struggle with most.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just sorry. I don't want to, steal all the space for other, attendees who might have questions for sure. No, it's interesting also because now that you're saying that we're sure about the space, not so much about time, it makes me think of geopoetics as a field, as a subfield in the context of comparative literature, and the way that the same space can embody time in so many different ways, and we witness this stratification of different possibilities of time within the same space, and the clues are there, they're scattered, right? So it's a matter of sort of opening up the spatial clues and show how different levels of meaning in a given text, or a set of texts, are speaking to different times in different ways, and it's a really fascinating problem. Thank you for bringing this up.
Yes, it is a geopoetics, and of course it's the different layers that you have to look at, and the layers will give clues to the time eventually. But you go via the sediments of language. The sediments of language are going to give clues to the time.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ingenito, and also Dr. Huber, for your discussion. I would like now to open the floor to questions from the audience. If there are any questions, please do type your question out in the Q&A box so that we can see it. For now, I would like to start with Muhammad Husseini, who says that he is from Torbat-e Jām, living in Canada, and he would like to help you, please. So Marie, if you would like to share your email address, perhaps, so that he may be in contact with you, perhaps that would be a great solution here.
Yes, of course. Any kind of contact I can get helps, because of course it's kind of difficult to have access to certain things. So I love to, yes.
Mm-hmm. Great. Mm-hmm. And should I just type the email address here?
Yes. I can also share my slide again, but that will mean that I cannot, I think, see you anymore. So I think if you could share the email address, that would be great.
Great, we will share that. Good, and then we have another question from Zahra Meshkani, who thanks you for the presentation and also the discussion. And she's asking, I wonder, from a border studies point of view, how do you situate Khorasani music of Dotāri in terms of movement between various borders, including but not limited to geographical Iran and Afghanistan border, linguistic borders, and temporal borders?
Thank you. That's of course one of the questions that is going to haunt me through the writing. I think just referring back to the map I showed from the book The Saint of John by Shivan Mahendra Raja, it is fundamentally the region does not show, the map does not show the borders. So I think the border is of course a physical entity which is very much present in the awareness of people there, because the political situation right now being what it is, it's not really crossable. So it's not a border into safe space right now. So it can be crossed, but it is not really. Crossing entails a great amount of risk. So in that sense, the border is present in people's minds. But in terms of the music, I think there's a lot of porosity and a lot of, as I was referring to in my talk, I think a lot of the music does not acknowledge the border. So many of the maqams, many of the songs, many of the traditions were brought from Afghanistan, and of course in previous time, before the kind of modern states were founded, there was no border. So it would have been a much more porous space where people would not really, it was part of the greater Khorasan area. So the border would not have existed. And the tradition of the Dotāris goes way back beyond the foundation of Iran and Afghanistan as the modern states we know. So the border is kind of an inconvenience right now more than anything else. But in terms of music, I think there's a great deal of common practice, common style. Of course, the Dotāri of Torbat is different from the one of Torbat. So of course, there are differences. But I think the cultural space, that is also the musical space, and the poetic space is very much a shared space. I think there are a lot of commonalities, and it is the same. It is the same cradle, cultural cradle from which this practice was born. So it was in terms of music, in terms of poetry. So yes, the modern border, to repeat what I just said, I think it's more of an inconvenience than anything else. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you very much. If you have, addressing the audience here, if you have further questions, please do type them in the Q&A box. For now, I can perhaps ask one of my questions. So I was really intrigued by the way in which you approached Navā'i and kind of teasing out how it makes us feel the same as the poet does, kind of the effect of the performance on us. Therefore, listening as spiritual practice, which continues to happen after it ends, and also before it is performed again. Found that thought very intriguing, and I wondering whether you could talk a bit about this aspect, and whether there's a difference in the way in which the sama happens in your case studies versus us listening to it as a recording today, and also perhaps in relationship to Quraysh's continuous presence. How do you see the differences there? Are there any?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. It's also a very hard question. Of course, listening to a recording, of course, is something that, of course, is a mediated presence. I would still say it is a presence, but it is a mediated presence. It's not the same as being there. But of course, I think one difference between listening to a recording and being present in that particular space, and not necessarily in the halqa zakr, because that would necessitate being part of the Sufi order, which we are not. But just listening as kind of people who share the same spiritual interest, maybe, if I can put it like that, requires some kind of, again, going back to this Arto, I think it requires some kind of intention of the listener. And it is also the pronouncing that intention is almost, if not a spoken speech act, but it is a speech act. The Arto, of course, having written about mystical poetry and mystical writing, he really analyzes what goes into the text. So I think we need to, this professing the intention that I am willing is at the basis of all of these circles, of all of these performances. So that can really be created by listening to a recording. And I think that is at the basis of the practice of the dotāris, even when they do not perform the zikr properly, because that needs to be done, that has certain formalities that need to be observed, like the presence of the sheikh and the absence of song and things like that. So there's certain formalities, but even in the presence of Ustad Torbat and him singing the Navā'i, it is different from listening to that, because we as listeners, we are here at a webinar, we're at a completely different space. Many did not expect to be listening to this particular piece of music, so we're not really entering into the covenant. And I think that is the fundamental difference. So we have an academic interest in this kind of material, but we're not existentially invested in taking part of and letting ourselves take part and letting ourselves also be carried away. So I think part of the academic endeavor is not to be carried away, whereas part of the kind of spiritual endeavor is to be carried away. So I think there's a fundamental contradiction at the very outset of the performance itself, of the listening, of the act of listening.
Thank you. Yeah. We will say goodbye to Dr. Ingenito. Thank you very much for being here. We have another minute or two for more questions, though. There is one question from Vincent Barletta, who thanks you for your talk. And he says, one of the issues university researchers run into is the binding effect of discipline. While folklorists and linguistic anthropologists tend to focus on performance and questions of emergent cultural practice, folks in literature tend to focus on text, with philologists especially concerned with origins and authorship. Based on your own interdisciplinary approach, what would you describe as your unit of analysis? How do you position work in relation to comparative literature, anthropology, and ethnopoetic? Thank you.
That is a wonderful question, something that I will be posing myself for the next couple of years, I think, constantly. I think at the moment I'm kind of amphibious, or at least I'm trying to be, which is not always very helpful, because I think I need to really focus on one particular discipline, because the focus on sources, the focus on philology, the focus on historicization is something that I think the materials I'm looking at fundamentally resist. So it is something like squaring the circle, trying to historicize material that has not been written down, that of course one can excavate the layers and the sediments of language and all of that to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. I think there's at one point, I will have to say that I'm a frog. I cannot run like a horse. So I would have to be a good frog and not pretend to be a horse and run and do literary analysis that the material does not lend itself to. So I think the philological instinct will have to take the back seat and let the material speak in a way that I think the drive to historicize, the drive to do philology may not be able to do justice to the text the way I think the text would deserve. I think trying to look at the text as, again, literary text that exists in manuscripts. I'm not doing manuscript studies because I can't. It is not possible. The material doesn't lend itself to that. Also, the texts are alive. There's something they keep being changed. They keep being changed by the singers, by the performers. So the different versions of the text. So they're fluid. They're constantly in flux, which is something that I think is, at this point, I find almost more interesting than the, again, drive to historicize, the drive to philologize, which I think is not going to be productive. It is an interesting question to think about time, to think about timelines, about origin, about sources. But in the end, I think these materials are about something else. They're really about the present, about the understanding the present as something that is in flux. If that makes, if that is an answer. But thank you for the question. That was wonderful.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Huber. Also, thank you to our two other commenters who shared their email addresses. We will be sharing that with Dr. Huber, so
thank you.
Be in touch. And with that, I think I'd like to conclude our event today. And thank you again, Dr. Huber, so much for your really wonderful talk and for bringing the recording sample as well. It was really a joy to listen to that today. To the audience, we thank you very much for coming to our first lecture of 2023-24. Again, if you have any more questions to Dr. Huber, please do get in touch with her. Her email address is displayed here. We would also love to hear your feedback about this session. If you'd like to take a quick survey, please scan the QR code shown on the screen, and we will also be sharing this link in the chat or via email if you don't have time to fill it out right now. We also would like you to point to our website and our lecture series page for you to stay updated for future events. As Dr. Abedini-Farad mentioned at the beginning, the next event will actually feature myself. I will be giving a lecture entitled Intermixture in Persian Epics, the Case of Kush, the Elephant-Eared, or Kush-e-Bilgush, which will be a hybrid event on December 1st, starting at 6:30 p.m. So if you are in Vancouver, please do come earlier. There will be a tea and sweets waiting for you starting at 6 p.m. I would be looking forward to it. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us on this Saturday, and I wish you a wonderful and relaxing weekend. Thank you so much.